First, I'd like to start by thanking all of our co-hosts who you can see on this wonderful slide created by one of our volunteers. And a special thank you to the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness, who has lent us their Zoom account and their staff time to make sure this is possible. Can we move to the next slide, please? All right, so if you have questions today, please make sure to use the Q&A function. You should be able to see that at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best, all of the speakers and panelists, to get you answers that you'd like. The recording of this event will be posted on the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness's YouTube page after the fact. So if you know folks who couldn't be here tonight because this timing was hard for them for whatever reason, please do let them know to watch and share the recording. I guess I will start by introducing myself. My name is Angelica Chazaro. For purposes of tonight, I am, because we are in a teach-in, I am a professor at the University of Washington School of Law. I began my career as an immigration attorney and was particularly angry to see the possible return to the war on drugs here in Seattle, because I know firsthand from working with many clients that any sort of drug crime on your record is basically a sentence of deportation, or at the very least blocking legalization for so many immigrants. And that is just one reason of the many you'll hear tonight why the ordinance being proposed in Seattle is a bad idea for our communities. Can we move to the next slide? So want to start with a land acknowledgement. We are presenting this webinar from the lands of the Coast Salish people, whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. Many Indigenous people continue to thrive in this place today, alive and strong. I also like to say, when doing the land acknowledgement, that one of the very first laws passed by the very first government that Seattle ever had was a law outlawing the presence of the Duwamish in Seattle after sunset. Today, Native Americans continue to be stopped by SPD at much higher rates than any other group. So this fight that we're talking about today, the fight against the war on drugs, which is a fight against racist policing, is part of a larger legacy of fighting unjust policing of the Indigenous people of these lands. Can we move to the next slide, please? So today's speakers, you can see our wonderful lineup here, and I will be introducing them as we go along, but they are a range of experts on this topic. And so you can take a look here and just sort of get a preview of where we're going. Can we have the next slide? So before jumping into our amazing speakers, I just want to take one more minute to sort of give a background on where we are and why this is happening, why we're having this conversation, right? So why is our Republican City Attorney Ann Davison trying to start a 1980s style war on drugs here in Seattle? And why would our city council consider going along, right? You all are here today probably because you've heard about legislation that is pending before city council that would add the crimes of drug possession and public use of drugs to our municipal code for the first time, right? Because except for a brief period when Seattle prosecuted marijuana possession, the city of Seattle has not been in the business of prosecuting folks for using drugs, right? That's actually been King County's job, and you can see that in the second column here, right? The city attorney, the Seattle Municipal Court, only prosecutes misdemeanors, which are lower level offenses. And drug possession and public use is currently not part of our municipal code. If it was added to our municipal code, only then would our city attorney be able to prosecute possession and public use of drugs. Now, in King County is able to prosecute misdemeanors and felonies. And until 2021, drug possession was a felony. So because it was a felony, that's why the city's court, the Seattle Municipal Court, did not prosecute it. In 2021, our Supreme Court decided in a case called Blake v. Washington State that law of drug possession as a felony was unconstitutional. So immediately there was no more law on the book that said that drug possession was a crime of any sort. So then it went to the state legislature to decide what to do about that. Many shenanigans ensued that many folks on this panel tonight could talk about. And after much negotiation, they landed on creating a new crime of drug possession as a gross misdemeanor and of public drug use as a gross misdemeanor. Now, because it is now a misdemeanor and not a felony, the city attorney is seeing this as a possibility for Seattle to start prosecuting this crime. And so that is what we're here to talk about today, the fact that the city of Seattle is considering using our very precious resources, despite the budget shortfall that we're facing, to prosecute drug crime of drug possession and public use. And so we're going to be hearing from several speakers on why that is not a great idea. We'll find out, what if the ordinance passes? Who will be worse off? Will it actually address people's drug use and stop people from using drugs in public? That's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to hear first from Kassandra Frederic, who's the executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance, a national nonprofit that works to end the war on drugs and repair the harms of the drug war, and to build alternatives grounded in science, compassion, health, and human rights. She's been instrumental in grounding the national drug policy conversation around reparative justice and restitution for communities harmed by the war on drugs, and we're lucky to have her with us today. So I'll pass it off to Kassandra.
Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to speak here. My name is Kassandra Frederic, as I was introduced. I she, her pronouns. I have the honor and privilege of being the executive director at Drug Policy Alliance. I'm based in New York. And I'm going to give a kind of a brief overview of what the national landscape is looking like, right? You know, on behalf of Drug Policy Alliance, you know, I would like to, I'm really grateful to see this pushback here around the city ordinance that would add drug possession and public use to the city's municipal code. Not only is it not needed, it's regressive. And it's a return to failed policies, an open invitation, if you will, to return to the racially inequitable, dangerous form of policing that many of you have worked so hard to reimagine over the past several years. But before I start that, I think it's really important for me to situate Seattle in the larger national conversation. You know, drug policy and harm reduction organizers in Seattle have been a beacon in the larger drug policy reform movement for a while, you know, really introducing compassionate and innovative approaches to drug use, pushing their leaders like the mayors and the King County prosecutor to take on an approach that at the time was a model for the rest of the country, making arrest and prosecution for personal use the lowest priority while referring people to intensive case management and supports. For over a decade, so many people have been looking to Seattle, learning that a community can have a health-focused approach to drug use instead of punishment. And I also want to say that the national landscape, like many people here in the state of Washington, in the city of Seattle, people are looking for answers to problems of public safety, mass criminalization, racist policing, addiction, overdose, and homelessness. But we know that punishing people for possessing drugs for personal use is not the answer to these issues. I think one of the things that I want to be really clear about is that in the national landscape, we are in the midst of an overdose crisis, a drug poisoning crisis, and we are in the middle of a massive national homelessness crisis. And while many people are rightfully concerned about the issues that these things face in the public, we tend to miss the reason as to why we're in this position in the first place. The larger issues of housing unaffordability, the constructed barriers to care, the hoops that we ask people to jump through, and for us at Drug Policy Alliance, drug prohibition. part of the reason why we're dealing with such massive deaths around overdose is because of drug prohibition and the way that it has constructed the demand for a substance like fentanyl. It is a market choice. This is a rational, logical choice that fentanyl would be showing up in these particular ways based on the choices and policies that our decision makers have made. And until we can have a conversation about the larger conversation about what are the circumstances that are creating the unaffordability of housing, the toxic drug supply, we will consistently be in a situation where the nation is facing over 100,000 people dying of overdose, the millions of people that are struggling with being insecurely housed, and the propaganda and the gaslighting that we actually don't have the resources to take care of our community members. When we think about this moment, Seattle is not the only place that is dealing with this pressure to recriminalize things that we have decided over the last 15 years are inappropriate to deal with criminalization. In fact, as Angelica said in the beginning, not only are we recriminalizing or relitigating issues that we have decided were inappropriate, we are now creating new crimes in order as a way to deal with the issues at hand. Again, neglecting the very reason why these things are present in the first place. At the national level, we see in our issues, not just around drugs, not just around homelessness, but also about reproductive health care, that care providers are under attack. People that provide support to folks that are living at the margins are under attack, and new laws are even being created to target those groups of people. And when we have conversations where care is no longer a shared value in our community, it continues the death march towards dehumanization. The ordinance that is being placed at the center of this conversation here in Seattle is a tool of dehumanization. It is a tool of disrupting the kind of future that we are trying to build. People are getting arrested nationally. People are getting arrested for drug possession every 31 seconds. Disproportionate amount of those people getting arrested for drug possession rates are that of folks of color. Drug possession arrests are the most arrested offense in this country. It is the gateway into the criminal legal system. And in fact, the drug possession arrest consistently disconnects people from the very care that is necessary to house people, to connect people to supportive services, to give people access to addiction treatment. The strategy of decriminalization disconnects people from care, the very care that is necessary to deal with the public concerns that people are raising and are using as reason for us to criminalize people. Nothing is more clear about that when we look at the criminalization of public use, which is a consistent conversation throughout the national hemisphere, where folks are talking about how to criminalize people who are obviously struggling with being a part of our social society and fabric. Instead of figuring out how we can support those people, we are moving towards criminalizing them. This is a classic case from the drug war playbook. It is to distract people. It is to get people to look at the symptoms of the root of the issue, and it does not actually get us to a place where we can actually change the circumstances that people are actually trying to navigate through. I will also say that there has been a lot of chatter about how this ordinance can be purely symbolic, that we just have to pass the bill and, this is part of the way it goes, but nobody's going to do anything about it. It is extremely dangerous precedent for a bill to be passed that criminalizes people and where our elected officials try to placate advocates and community members by saying that they will be able to manage it. Those people are temporary actors. Elections happen all the time. And what people will look at is the law. And what Seattle will do will create a precedent that other cities will follow. It is not all on Seattle to deal with ending the drug war. However, it is important for the role that Seattle has played in progressive drug policy reform to hold the line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kassandra, for that incredibly important context. As you say, drug possession is the gateway into the criminal legal system, and criminalization disconnects people from care. So next, we're going to hear about what care people actually need. We're going to hear from Dr. Tom Fitzpatrick, who's an infectious disease physician with the University of Washington and an expert in harm reduction and public health approaches to drug use. Thank you so much for being with us, Tom.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for everyone who organized this event and everyone who's joining. I think it's really important that we all work together to figure out how we can avoid recriminalizing drug use. The reason why I feel that most profoundly is in my role as both a physician and someone that works on public health policy related to harm reduction and the ways that we provide services to people who use drugs. I know other people will talk about all of the important ways in which avoiding interactions and avoiding incarceration is important to allowing people to live full, healthy lives. And the way that I see that is the way that incarceration and criminalization impacts people's health. So when it comes to the 30,000-foot view, what we know from public health policy, we can see that research has shown that when people are arrested and incarcerated, either in prisons or in jails, they become at increased risk of death from overdose in the time after they are released from incarceration. And the risk of people overdosing and dying from that overdose can be anywhere between 10 to sometimes 40 or 50 times higher than the general population. We have colleagues down at OHSU in Portland who just looked at data which followed people in the time, the years and weeks after they were released from incarceration in prison, and found that in those first 2 weeks after people are released from incarceration, they have nearly 10 times the risk of overdosing than the general population or people who are otherwise exposed to opioids. Why am I focusing on this? I have heard from Ann Davison and other members of our community that they feel like a return to criminalization and incarceration will be a method to prevent overdose deaths. And I just don't think that there's any way of reading the public health data, what we know, that would support such an interpretation. In fact, what we know is that if we incarcerate people more, if we put them in jail, and in some cases put them in prison, then we're jeopardizing their lives and we're jeopardizing their health. Because particularly when they come out of incarceration, they will have been in a situation where they haven't been able to use opioids for a while, so their opioid tolerance will be low. And that is an opportunity for people to unintentionally use more opioids than they're intending, and becomes a huge risk factor for people dying from overdose. And I would say even outside of overdose, which I know I've been focusing on, there are other aspects of health which get totally disrupted when people are incarcerated. And this is something that I can talk to less from the public health standpoint, the research standpoint, and more from a clinician standpoint. Many people who use drugs have other aspects that are going on with their health, other medical conditions that really need to be attended to and attended to on a regular basis. And all too frequently, as a physician at Harborview, I see people who are incarcerated either in jail or prison. And as a consequence of their incarceration, they're no longer able to receive the continuity of care and the dedicated healthcare that they need to make sure that they stay healthy, make sure that they stay connected with their doctors, they're receiving the medications that they need. And And I really worry that if we return to a place where people can be arrested and detained for using drugs in public spaces or simple possession, that we're going to see so many people get disconnected from their doctors, disconnected from their other healthcare providers. And that's ultimately that's not going to end at just increasing overdose deaths, but deaths and morbidity, mortality, despair from just not being able to receive the care that you need. I'm really worried that that's also going to increase as well. So I wish I had a kind of an optimistic take on this. I really hope that as we band together, we can make sure that people who use drugs are treated with respect and we don't return to the punitive policies that hurt their health before. And I really do hope that everyone can feel empowered to, if they hear the misinformation that somehow incarceration or arrest or detention is a way to connect people to healthcare, that is not true. We have no data to suggest that. And so if anybody would like to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to provide references and research in order to facilitate those conversations with policymakers or others. So thank you so much for this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fitzpatrick, for explaining how this ordinance would actually make things worse for the populations that you work with. We'll be hearing later on from other folks who are on the ground doing work and who can talk about what are the investments needed and where do we need to double down if we actually want to address the issues that this ordinance claims to address. Next, we'll be hearing from Anita Khandelwal. Anita is a longtime public defender and the director of the King County Department of Public Defense. Under her leadership, King County public defenders work every day on the front lines of our criminal legal system and know firsthand the costs of a criminalizing approach to drug use. So thank you for being with us, Anita.
Thanks so much, Angelica, for inviting me to be a part of this. Yeah, I think, the long and the short is whatever you think of criminalization, and I think for the reasons that the previous speakers pointed out, right, it's bad policy, it is ineffective. But even the state has recriminalized drug possession, but the city is uniquely poorly placed to implement to prosecute these cases. The city is not. So historically, because drug possession was a felony, it fell within the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office to prosecute. The city has not prosecuted drug possession for many years. Arrest for marijuana, which was possession of marijuana, which was a misdemeanor, were deprioritized in 2003, and a statewide initiative allowing marijuana possession passed in 2012. And so, again, even if you think prosecution is the right response, the city has zero infrastructure developed to appropriately or effectively prosecute drug crimes. And I think, the county has many more resources, right? They have a drug diversion court. They have a diversion program called therapeutic diversion. It's called TAD, focused on individuals who possess between 1 and 3 grams of drugs. And since 2018, I believe, the King County Prosecuting Attorney has not prosecuted standalone drug possession cases involving less than 1 gram of drugs. The city attorney's office has a really different approach to the criminal legal system. They recently, on Friday, announced that they would be terminating participation in community court, which is a light touch court that helps connect individuals in the criminal legal system in a very low barrier services, and allows for a relatively quick dismissal of their cases so that people's lives are not endlessly destabilized by sort of the revolving door of misdemeanors. And so they've demonstrated a real shift towards a much more punitive approach. And so again, if drugs are going to be criminalized, it is much better policy for the county, which has longstanding experience in being thoughtful about the approach to criminalization of drugs and not prosecuting some of these very, very low level cases, for that work to remain there. instead of you know, in the hands of a city attorney, and you know, that doesn't have experience with these kinds of crimes. And I think you know, if the city does not adopt an ordinance, the county will continue to prosecute these crimes within their existing policy, which again is, relatively speaking, for you know, if you're talking about criminalizing drugs, is a relatively more progressive policy. And you know, the county can continue to use their diversion programs to handle these cases. And the city may need to reimburse the county for any prosecutions that come that the county engages in that come from Seattle Police Department for drug possession. But even that, I think, would be reasonable. That money could go towards diversion programs. Oh, sorry, talking too fast. My apologies. So sort of just to step back, it makes much more sense if there's going to be criminalization for the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office to continue doing that body of work, and for the City Attorney's Office not to take that on.
Thank you so much, Anita. We really appreciate you showing up to bring all of these points to us. I also wanted to share portions of a letter from SEIU 925 that they wrote to City Council and delivered today. SEIU 925 represents the public defenders that Anita works with every day. This is what they wrote to Council. They say, "We should be clear about the volume of work and cost to staff that this ordinance would lead to. These cases would require hiring multiple deputy prosecutors, support staff, requisite public defenders, plus court staff, probation officers, and more. So the bill for increased public defense services alone, just for a minimal annual estimation of criminal charges, would cost the city far more than $1 million per year. Seattle has already had to tap into Jumpstart funds to fulfill existing priorities, and the April budget outlook was not positive. So again, however you feel about the criminalization of drug use, if you care about our city's budget and about money going into life-saving and life-affirming services, then this is something to oppose. Can we go to the next slide? The public defenders also warned about the backlog that already exists, what this will do to our court. They say SMC, the Seattle Municipal Court, currently has a 3-month delay on plea hearings due to the massive court backlog. Ann Davison's proposal will completely overburden a court that is near collapse already, driven by her increased filings. And in case anyone is applauding her efforts to quote unquote clean up Seattle streets, 70% of SMC cases assigned to DPD, to the Department of Public Defense, are dismissed by the city attorney's office, frequently after months of wasted litigation, investigation, and the complete destabilization of every person accused as the process drags on and on needlessly. Each of those cases harms our community, and this ordinance would exponentially increase that damage. Final slide. Then they go on to talk about how this would basically lead us to Seattle's version of New York stop and frisk, right? They say another concerning impact of this ordinance is the power that would be handed to the Seattle Police Department. Criminalizing drug use and possession at the municipal level would create the same dynamic with an SPD, which led to the New York Police Department's stop and frisk programs. Stop and frisk effectively gave police in New York a blanket ability to stop and search anyone who looks suspicious, or in this case, looks like they could use drugs, and ultimately led to a class action lawsuit from public defenders in New York on behalf of their clients. All right, we can remove the slides now. And at this point, I'd love to introduce Blaze Vincent. At the age of 17, he was tried as an adult and convicted of attempted murder and assault. In 2022, after serving 18 years in prison, and in light of the Washington State Supreme Court decision in State v. Blake, which we talked about today, which made felony drug possession unconstitutional, Blaze was resentenced and immediately released from incarceration. While he was incarcerated, he co-created a successful behavioral health program called the Redemption Project, and he continues to contribute to our community through Kids Are Kids, as the co-president of the Freedom Project, and with the Seattle Clemency Project. So thank you, Blaze, for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And, I'm directly impacted, by the so-called war on drugs. And, I was raised in the Central District of Seattle, which is right up the hill from Seattle, downtown Seattle. And I think with the propaganda when we deal with all these drugs and the war on drugs is, they show all these images of individuals who are houseless and individuals who are struggling with substance use, in our downtown Seattle, in our business area. And it seems like these particular laws are put in place to so-called clean our streets up for tourism and for the interests of business owners at the stake of our community members. And, to back up being impacted, like I said, I was raised in the Central District. And then in 1970, the Central District was 70% Black. Now the Central District is 14% Black. And, due to the Blake decision previously, we had a drug possession charge that criminalized, non-criminal behavior. You didn't have a mens rea or guilty element for you to be found guilty of being found with drugs. And, that particular law is significant because just like one of the panelists earlier before just talked about is the stop and frisk policies in New York. That's what was happening in Washington and in particular in Seattle, in particular in my particular community. And it was crossed and supported by a federal program known as Weed and Seed, in which there was federal funding provided for law enforcement to particularly target my community and individuals who look like me and individuals who are brown, who our state legislature in 2019 put out a report and showed that, Black people are 3 times more likely to be found with these drug offenses, which are now ruled constitutional, than our white counterparts. And so this 40 years of unconstitutional policy, ultimately led to the gentrification of my neighborhood and, the defunding of our education system with the McCleary and the overfunding of our prison and carceral system in our state has led to this income inequality, has led to people being houseless, has led to people who had to cope with trauma of the past from the state and ultimately deal with substance abuse. And, my position is this. We're dealing with homelessness, and we understand that's an issue in which people need services to be helped so that they can be housed. And when we're talking about addiction and substance abuse, we're dealing with individuals who we know need rehabilitation. And we're creating a law now that's public drug use and making it a crime. So we're essentially making people who can't afford to have a house and who use drugs criminals. What we all know is that when we criminalize particular individuals, we stigmatize them as dangerous. And then we're electing to have law enforcement interact with our community members as being dangerous for issues that are not necessarily dangerous in and of themselves. And so I'm here to tell you, because a lot of the panelists and a lot of my allies here have spoken on a bunch of different issues to support, and I don't necessarily have to repeat them. Somebody's going to die from these policies, as they always do. This disproportionate minority contact with law enforcement, they're gonna have contact with these particular individuals who are vulnerable, who are dealing with substance use, and they're gonna detain them. And when they resist detainment because nobody wants to be detained, and even some issues, people dealing with certain substance uses, particularly what we're dealing with now with opioid crisis, you can just imagine somebody dealing with that and understanding that you're going to cage them and they're going to have to go withdraw. They're going to have a natural aversion to being detained. And so the police are going to use whatever force necessary to detain them. And it eventually be excessive force. And it's not a matter of when for people that look like me and our community members, or a matter of if, it's a matter of when that somebody's going to die due to police contact with enforcing this law. And not only that, people are going to be harmed by simply being detained. People are going to be harmed being caged. They're not going to get the medical and treatment services or rehabilitative services that are necessary to help individuals that are dealing with substance use addiction. And so we know that caging people and giving people sentences doesn't solve these particular problems. We know it's services. And so for our local officials to devote resources to particular policies that we know harm particular individuals in our community, is I find it to be absurd in the age that we live with all the science, with everything that we've known about these policies that we created and all the harm that this caused, and they continue to do that. So I want to be very clear where I emphasize is that our local officials who will enact these policies will result in people dying that don't need to die. We don't got to go into statistics. People can say, oh, you don't know what's going to predict the future or whatever, but no, this is that serious. And I think it's a lack of empathy because individuals who are in these positions to make these decisions for policy, it's not their loved one that are out there on these particular streets that they were trying to clean up. So I will appeal to them that if it was your particular loved one or your family member that was struggling with this and unfortunately coping with whatever hardships that they was dealing in life and ultimately dealing with public drug use that they now criminalize, would you want them to have contact with law enforcement that could ultimately escalate and being lethal? Would you want them to be caged and not get the services that they need to be helped? And so I just simply leave you with that, very simple and plain. It's literally life and death. People will die because of these policies. And I think we need to be straightforward. And anybody who understands what we're going through as far as with a state and with a nation, with substance use addiction and income inequality and homelessness, needs to understand that if you support these policies or assent to these policies, you're literally inevitably creating circumstances that will ultimately harm and even kill our community members. And I thank you for your time and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Blaze. Yeah, as you say, people will die if this ordinance passes. I want to introduce next Malika Lamont. Malika is the program director for Vocal Washington, a grassroots organization that builds power among low and no income people directly affected by the war on drugs, homelessness, mass incarceration, and the HIV/AIDS epidemic to create healthy and just communities for all. She's also the director of the LEAD Washington State Technical Assistance Team, and she's worked to address social determinants of health for over 20 years. Her experience in designing and implementing harm reduction programs is unparalleled in the state, and we're lucky to have her with us today. Thank you, Malika.
Thank you for that generous introduction. I'm not going to repeat all the things that people have said, but I am going to try and build upon them. There are robust responses that can be scaled to the need that exists in Seattle and in King County already in place to divert folks that are arrested to pre-booking diversion programs that use a harm reduction-based case management approach that is evidence-based. The evidence overwhelmingly shows us that incarcerating people that are experiencing behavioral health issues is, as my colleague Blaze just mentioned, deadly for people. And it will harm folks, and people will, we know that people are 33% more likely to die of an overdose after being incarcerated. Washington State has the 4th highest in custody death rate in the entire country. So when we think about these things, and it puts into context the risks that we're facing in the name of helping people, we know that what works is harm reduction based approaches that keep people out of incarceration and engage them into service. The proposed policy flies in the face of the policy direction that Seattle and King County have been taking for years, which is to increase the infrastructure to be able to help folks and to increase the response and funding to be able to help people. It is not adequate for the number of people that need this assistance, but that has been the overarching approach. Seattle just passed an ordinance a couple of years, a resolution to legalize or to decriminalize psychedelics. Now, under this policy, I would make that illegal. So, I mean, these are things that, like, as Kassandra mentioned earlier, people are elected every couple of years, but we have the same people in office right now that are entertaining moving this forward. But passing this ordinance, it is harmful, and not passing it isn't going to remove local authority of arrest and jail, which already exists under state law, which is part that has increased the criminal legal system penalties for simple possession and created the new crime of public use targeted towards our most vulnerable people in 5536. Hence why Vocal Washington has been advocating the past 2 legislative cycles and beyond to try and get folks to organize during session in both 2021 and 2023 against these policies. Furthermore, the workers that do harm reduction had the protections that made it so that they could do the work in the community be undermined by 5536. So now workers are more vulnerable, and our state policy also made it so that it is harder to cite the treatment services that people need. So to many of the points that Kassandra was mentioning earlier, we are marching away from the things that are actually going to help people. And unfortunately, like I said, this local ordinance, passing it would be harmful, but not passing it is not going to remove local legal authority of arrest. The legal system is not helpful to people that use drugs or for addressing issues related to behavioral health and poverty. It deepens health disparities and is a lethal social determinant of health. So these are all things that people, need to think about when we're entertaining more regressive policies. What would be effective and helpful is to increase investment in evidence-based supports for people that are experiencing behavioral health and poverty related issues. For example, housing first, low barrier employment, low barrier health and treatment services, and increased investment in LEAD and other harm reduction related interventions, such as syringe exchange. So, and protecting the workers that do that work in the field. So these are, and increasing, like I said, funding for treatment. The notion, I've been watching the chat, and the notion that locking people up makes them more safe is misguided. And the evidence shows us that that is not true. It makes people more vulnerable to overdose. From 2021 to 2022, in King County, Black people went from being 2 to 3 times more likely than a white person to die of an overdose to 4 to 5 times more likely to die of an overdose. Indigenous people went from 4 to 5 times more likely to die of an overdose to 9 times more likely than a white person to die of an overdose. These policies disproportionately impact people of color. And if you think that I'm pulling those numbers out of a hat, go to the King County Public Health website. They have an active, interactive data search that you can look into these statistics. We need to move with the evidence. The evidence shows us that harm reduction is effective. Keeping people out of incarceration is effective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malika, especially for those devastating statistics that just highlight how important it is not to continue to go down the criminalization path and actually make things worse. I want Brandie now to bring us home. Brandie is the person I call when I need to find out what our city and county should actually be doing to help our most marginalized neighbors. She's the Director of Community Justice at REACH at Evergreen Treatment Services, a group that builds relationships with people experiencing homelessness and connects them to the help they need. Everything from food and clothing to medical care, shelter, and mental health and/or substance use treatment. So take it away, Brandie.
Thanks, Angelica. You make me feel special. I got to have you introduce me everywhere I go. A lot of people said a lot of the things I'm going to say, but I'll just talk about it a little bit more. You know, I love the slide that Alec and Angelica put up earlier about how much it's going to cost, right? To even do this, we can't afford it. We don't have the capacity in our legal system. We don't have the capacity in our jails to even make this work. And so the things that we do know work are actually even more affordable. And so, you know, when we go to the city council hearing, this is what we have to push these other initiatives. So we know what works. Malika talked about LEAD. I'm going to talk about REACH and VITAL and just more social service programs. We have places like the Aurora Commons that people could come who they are. We have the Bridge Shelter that is enhanced shelter for folks that really works and connects people to housing. We have We Deliver Care, who is doing work down on 3rd Avenue and more milieu management support. We have these things and the city council never puts money up to take them to scale. And so that's what we need to talk about. We need more housing and navigation linkages. We need more access to coordinated care and medical appointments. Like we need more occupational therapists. If you're doing outreach with our teams, there's a shortage of nurses. We need nurses out there on the street handling some of the wound care and things of that nature. These are the things that support drug users. We need real treatment linkages when people are ready. And so, you know, right now they could use some of their money, and one of those health hubs should be a drug user health hub. It should be where people could go stabilize when they do have an overdose, or like a sobering center for drug users. Those are the kind of things we need versus taking people to jail. We need real legal systems navigation, and navigation where prosecutors actually have power to resolve cases and not just do the status quo. You know, we're looking at stuff now with some of the people we work with where people are about to do 5 and 10 years in prison because they have so many points for stealing alcohol, because they're alcoholics, not because they're career criminals. That's what we're facing right now. So we need real legal system navigation that wants to have solutions. We need meaningful connection to building community supports. And so it's one thing to fund a bunch of programs and programs of color because you think you're doing the right thing. There's another thing to really build capacity and fund people at the level to do scaled up work to really make meaningful impact. And so when you look at some of the models we work in that have multidisciplinary care, like I'll give example, VITAL, 70% of the program participants have reduced their jail visits. 60% have reduced their time in the emergency rooms. Those are the things actually citizens of our city want to see. They want to see more help. They don't want to see people in jail and prisons costing us more money. They want to see real services for drug users. And so one of the things that I think we focus on when we're doing these conversations with city councils, real alternative programs and scaling them up to a level that works. Even with LEAD and doing diversions, I think that's great to be able to have more diversions, but then you need to have robust services to match those things. You also need to have resources for law enforcement to use. Law enforcement, I bet you if we talk to them, if they could speak freely, but we know they can't, they don't want to deal with this because they know there's no resources to connect to. They know it makes more work, and they know it takes away from really crimes that are really happening that they want to get at. And so those are the things we need to remind our city council before they do this regression back to the 80s style of attacking drug policies. We need to scale up real programs, and we've lost some of the programming after the COVID shutdown. Nobody's talking about COVID anymore because rich people are okay, but there's people still suffering from COVID. We still haven't matched the level of care we did pre-COVID, right? And so we need to think about the aftermath that COVID has put on all our communities with the trauma and the stress and the unemployment and the no access to healthcare. And then you have what we see down here downtown, a lot of people suffering from drug use. But we need to go back to a system. Well, I don't even know if we had a system where we actually loved people, but you have to love the people to serve the people. And if they can't get that, we're in real trouble. And if they're not going to get it, at least scale up our program so we could love on the people till they get there would be my question to all of them. Thank you.
Oh, Brandie, thank you so much for all of that. You know, we have the solutions already, right? This idea that we need to go back to like a 1980s war on drug paradigm when we have not invested in the very real solutions that Brandie presented us and Malika presented us and Blaze talked about and Dr. Fitzpatrick talked about. It's just, it's a false, we're being invited to a party that none of us want to be at. So if you want to stop this 1980s war on drugs style party, share what you learned today with your community. This will be posted on the YouTube channel of the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness. So please share this recording share this information. Email and call your city council members. We've highlighted here the 3 city council members we are particularly targeting for calls and emails, but all of them need to hear from you. So District 5, District 6, District 7, if these are your districts, if this is where you live, you need to be reaching out to your council members, and wherever you live in Seattle or King County, this is going to have impacts more widely. So please, please reach out to email and call your city council members. Finally, next Tuesday, June 6th, City Council will be considering this ordinance and could vote on it that day. It could pass that day. And so we are asking you all to please, apart from emailing and calling your city council members, to consider showing up either in person at 1:45 to sign up for public comment, or to show up over Zoom like we are today to offer public comment remotely. All right. And there's 2 bit.lys on here. One has an email template where you can automatically send an email. One has some talking points and all of the city council members' phone numbers and email addresses. The more you can personalize your email and the subject title, the more likely it is that they will read it, but they're also counting like sheer number of emails they receive. So please reach out and let them know, and let your neighbors know. We appreciate all of you taking the time on an evening to be with us for Emergency Teach-In. We're going to continue fighting together, not just to stop the new war on drugs, but to get the funding and the investments we need so that folks like Brandie and Malika can keep doing what works. All right. Thank you all very, very much. Good night.